arms towards the sun. You feel the warmth of the rays, and then you know you're alive, and you don't have to be afraid of anything, 'cause you know the truth, and the truth is love, yes it is. Wasn't what they said to you, or anything that you learned from a book or from the news. It's not like that, 'cause it's a thing. It is something that you do. Doop 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 doop. Doop 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 doop. Doop 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 doop. Dib-on baby did alone. Doop 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 doop. Doop 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 doop. Doop 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 doop. Dib-on baby did love's the highest truth. Nothing could be higher than love, my friend.
Welcome to the Bassline, everyone. Destiny Rezendez is an independent researcher and a Twitter sensation. She has produced phenomenal threads unearthing the missing puzzle pieces to help us understand what occurred leading up to and into the global pandemic scenario we are still living through. She's done outstanding interviews with our good friend Ryan Christian at Last American Vagabond, and we are honored to have her join us here today on the Bassline. It is with fascination and intrigue that I introduce today's guest, my friend, the incredible Destiny Rezendez. How are you today, Destiny? Welcome to the Bassline.
Maya. I'm doing really well. How are you?
Oh, I'm doing great. It's been a real busy little scramble leading up to today, but that's life in the big city. I have a gig tonight with Leon and the Peoples. If anyone's in the Yonkers area, it's a free outdoor gig. So come see me play. It's a pretty awesome band, I have to say. I'm really honored to be a part of that. And actually, that was the music that was played accidentally to end the last program. We wanted to play my friend Master Cheese's new track, but we got the tracks mixed up. You know, it was all being done, passed around last second, and you heard some good music, but it wasn't the music we intended to play. But today's guest, my friend Destiny Rezendez, she is a living legend in her own right, I would say, a young living legend who is an incredible researcher. She's a part of a lot of different communities, I would say, and she's a very well-rounded intellect and a very curious mind, clearly, and she's certainly a beloved figure on the medical freedom scene, and I'm so excited to have her today. And I wanted to ask you, first of all, Destiny, tell us about your creative process. I'm always just so fascinated by the process of people. Like, take us through a day of you doing prime research when you're at your best, you're uninterrupted, you don't have any errands to run on that particular day, and you're going to do a deep dive, you're going to go all the way in. What does that day consist of for you, so maybe other people who are aspiring to be researchers or independent journalists can gain some inspiration and some insights from that? What's your process?
Okay. I can give you like a typical day for Destiny when it comes to research. So I start off my day, I think like most Americans, with a cup of coffee. I put butter in my coffee, though. I'm under the belief that your brain needs fat and sugar first thing in the morning to work. And so I'll put in either coconut oil or like real butter in my coffee. I think it gets my gears working better. And then I will take my laptop from my room and I'll take it outside on the front porch, which is where I do probably 75% of my research is on my porch. I find that it's something about having the birds singing in the background. I mean, I'm not out there right now because I'm in an interview, but normally if you catch me, I'm on my porch. So because I find that before I had this kind of routine, I would just stay in my room and research, but you burn out very easily. The artificial light will cause headaches, and I found I've had an extreme decrease in headaches the more that I work outside.
Wow.
So a lot of it is about making sure that I can dedicate 8 hours, straight. If I'm in a rabbit hole, I need to feel good, or else I'm not going to be able to keep researching. So I try to try to do the self-care at the same time, which I know is like a little cheat, but it's the way it works for me. And so I get some grounding, I get sunlight in my eyes, I get to smell the fresh air and hear the birds. And that really helps me be able to feel healthy enough to stay with it. Because if you just do it inside of a dark room, when I did this for years, you will get migraines and headaches. You're tired and lethargic, and you won't be able to power through it. At least I wasn't able to. And so I try to incorporate being outside as much as possible. And then I dig down. I don't know, the way my process works, I guess my brain is kind of funny, but I don't think that that's a bad thing. I think, if you think a little differently, I think that's a good thing. And so I kind of just go with it. Like, I really trust my body and I trust my instincts. So if I find a lead that I find fascinating, or I think it's going to go somewhere, I begin to grill it like a man talking to another man who just asked his only daughter for his hand in marriage. Like, I'm going to grill you so bad. Like, I want the nittiest, grittiest details if it's a good lead. And, just like you're trying to take my only daughter away from me, I'm going to find everything else I can find about you, or whatever the topic is. And, kind of obsess a bit about it. But I always allow myself opportunity to sidetrack. And I think it's important to sidetrack when you're in research, because I do believe that it's a spiritual thing. Like, understanding and learning is very different from discernment. And I feel like there's all the information in the world today. We're very blessed to live in a technological, advanced society. And we have these abilities. You have AI, you have search engines out the wazoo. You have literally the world is your oyster. And sometimes people find that distraction where you get pulled into a different direction as inhibitory. I don't get caught up in a side thing. It's, later down the line, I find out it was very integral for me to take that side route. So I kind of just trust myself. I really trust myself with research, only on the basis of always questioning, what I'm consuming. But I try to leave it for, I believe that God tells you everything you need to know, and there's no such thing as an accident. So I trust the avenues, and there is bad information out there, and it is part of that discernment process to be confronted with bad information so that you learn to recognize it in the future. Right. And once you do, you can cut that time down. You can cut it down and you can focus more.
Great point. Great. I love that point, actually, because that's kind of a very concise phrasing of one of my main points, which is I'm so opposed to not just censorship, but this whole concept of the sterilizing of information. I'm so offended at the notion that people think they can protect me from the bad misinformation and disinformation and my favorite malinformation, which for anyone who doesn't remember,
one's the best.
Isn't that the best? That means information that's not untrue. Right. Not information that's untrue, but information that you're not up to understanding. So you shouldn't bother yourself with that malinformation and just let us handle the information stuff. Is kind of that.
I find that repulsive too. I find it extremely, it's just so inhuman to do that to people, and to determine what kind of information they are qualified to handle. It's so against the First Amendment. It makes me sick.
Yeah, it reminds me of, I might have shared this story one time on this program before. It's kind of like a deja vu kind of feeling. I'm not sure if I'm repeating myself, but I remember talking to a filmmaker, and we were talking artist to artist, me as a bass player, him being a filmmaker. And I said, so as a filmmaker, you must have seen all the classic films to really be inspired, right, by what a great film consists of. And he said, well, actually, yeah, but you also need to spend a good amount of time watching bad film to know what mistakes to not make. Because if you only watch good things, you won't be properly prepared or groomed to not make common mistakes. And I think that's a fair point, too. It kind of also reminds me of like practicing an instrument. You're going to, unfortunately, unless you're just one of those cats who just never, ever makes a mistake, which I don't know if that exists. I mean, I get, who comes to mind when I think of that? Maceo Parker. Maceo Parker, is not recorded anywhere, even on a million bootlegs. The guy never hit a bad note in public. But in general, when you work on music, you're going to have to, flub a couple of chords here and there and work on it to get things perfect. But I was in a space with you. It was how long ago was that? I should have the date in front of me, but I don't, unfortunately. What was it? A week ago or 2 weeks ago? It seems like less than 2 weeks ago to my imagination that Fauci was grilled in front of that committee, and you were in a space that basically covered the whole event. I was kind of in and out of the space, unfortunately. I caught a good chunk of it, but I noticed you were there early on and seemed to be pretty locked in. I hope you had a good connection and heard most of the testimony.
Oh, I was watching it separate of the space too, because I had the space going on my phone, so that like when I had to walk away from my computer, I could just listen to it. So I had it going two different streams. That was Lindsay's space. It was a vaccine-centered space.
Right, exactly. Lindsay House, who was recently a guest. So you know, you're such an insightful person, such a knowledgeable person. You've studied this stuff so comprehensively. I would love to take advantage of the fact that happened pretty recently, and just you take as much time as you want or as little time as you need, but just tell us what jumped out at you from that testimony. What are some of the things, if you took a couple of notes or at least mental notes, what did you gather from that whole thing? What were the main points?
That was, I think that was it the 4th or the 6th of this month? I always forget the exact date. It was the 4th or the 6th, but Fauci had his testimony in front of the select subcommittee for the origins of coronavirus. And I was particularly fascinated, which is not normally my response to seeing Fauci on the stand. It's been nothing but infuriating for people like myself. But this, I was a bit pleasantly surprised. I wasn't fully satisfied, but I mean, no one ever is. But I was very pleased to see both sides of the aisle, Republicans and Democrats. They both had very, important questions that they asked Fauci. There was only a handful, and that come to mind. Garcia is one of the representatives who was really softballing all the questions. Other than him, everyone had decent questions that I felt like they should have asked a long time ago. But what was most potent to me was the fact that you didn't notice if you didn't watch it. Fauci lost a lot of that pompousness that he once had. And I feel like that kind of has to go along with the fact that he's no longer in this very prestigious position in government where he's making more than anyone in our entire government. He's no longer that person. So he lost a little bit of his gumption, and it was kind of nice to see him humbled a little bit because he wasn't as snarky and finger-pointy as he had been in previous testimonies. But he still was too pompous for someone who has messed up as greatly as he has. Fauci's a really interesting character, and I have spent an extraordinary amount of time researching him and his history. And when you look at the trajectory of how he became Dr. Fauci, it's a very coddled environment that he was given. I mean, he was, from the very beginning of his childhood, he was given the sense that he was important in helping people by delivering drugs. His parents ran a pharmacy, I think off Staten Island, and it was his job when he was little to bicycle around to all the patients and deliver their medications for his mother and his father. So essentially, Fauci's been a drug dealer since he could walk.
Yeah, right.
He's a drug dealer. He's a fancy drug dealer in a coat, but he's a drug dealer. It's all he's ever been. And it's what he's good at. It's what he knows. But he was already primed for the position of the kind of person that would listen to pharma over patients, because seeing his parents as pharmacists and being involved in their business your whole life, all you're ever seeing is the medication going to a person. You're not seeing the differentials. You're not seeing a lab workup. You don't see any of that in the pharmaceutical industry. That's for doctors. And so for him to become a doctor and call himself a doctor when all he really is a glorified pharmaceutical sales rep. I mean, that's really what he is. And his entire background starts looking, makes more sense when you realize this is not a doctor. He's a pharma rep. He's a glorified pharma rep. And so he lost a lot of that kind of pompousness that came with this "I'm king of pharmaceuticals," because he's not anymore, and he lost a lot of that. It was good to see him humbled. I saw him shifting a lot of blame which is natural in government. It's not just Fauci, but, of course he wants to say that his top advisor, Dr. David Morens, that everything he said is all on him. And well, it's not all on him. You're his boss. So if your employees are acting up or they're doing something illegal under your care at your job that you're the boss of, it falls on you. That's part of being an employer. That's your responsibility as your employees. And he tried to, essentially brush that under the rug when Morens was very clearly caught and admitted in front of the Senate that he had hidden information from FOIAs. He had used other emails with Dr. Fauci, and that Fauci was really good at hiding all his mistakes on personal emails. And these are huge problems with transparency. And I particularly find offense to it because I do FOIA requests. I've done dozens of FOIA requests over the years. And right now I'm in the middle of one with the CIA that I've been battling for 3 years. And so, you expect as a citizen that the leaders in the system that you put all your hard-earned money into, you would expect that the very minimum, which is a freedom of information request, that you're at least going to get the information you requested. It's not a completely easy process. They make it pretty difficult to get information. But to know that on the other side of your request is people like Anthony Fauci, who have taken all the important information and put it through private emails, which are not protected by FOIA, and that they're hiding information, and that the FOIA officer themselves, according to Fauci and Morens, had taught them how to hide the information so that people like me and other FOIA requesters don't get that information. I found that, the fact he didn't take accountability for that, to me, is just, you want to fire him, but unfortunately it doesn't work there anymore, but you want to. Yeah. And so, I have a lot of feelings about it, but overall, to me, the whole hearing, in my opinion, was a beneficial thing versus it being, just another kick in the can, because it keeps the conversation on COVID injuries and the origins of COVID, it keeps it relevant. So even if nothing came out of it, the fact that we're talking about it is valuable. I understand that now, being a researcher in the world of information. If it's being talked about, when they say, bad press is good press, because any press is good press, they really mean that. And I didn't understand that until I became an influencer and I started doing research. I didn't realize the validity of that statement. But as long as it's being talked about, you have a chance. You have a chance. And so the fact that we just had that really big, huge subcommittee hearing was, I think, valuable, if anything, just because it keeps the conversation on COVID, and it has to stay there. In my opinion, it's just we have to see this through. So any hearing's a good hearing, in my opinion, right now.
That's a good point. And I have a slightly different memory of the hearing, which I'm certain you watched with greater care and detail than I was able to. But I remember the Democrats just swooning over Fauci. I don't remember the Democrats asking particularly tough questions. I remember a couple of Democrats saying to the effect of, oh, it's such a shame that you even need to be put through any of this, Dr. Fauci. You're a national hero, and, you've saved millions of lives and all. I remember a few Democrats just swooning over him to the extent that I thought, that's actually unprofessional. He was in an executive position at this critical time. Could you actually just challenge him somewhat, just ask him some important questions? But they just made it just this thing of just worshiping him and swooning over him, I felt.
Yeah, there's two Democrats that I remember that were like that, and one's a woman, I don't remember her name.
Yeah.
But the other one is that Garcia guy, and
right.
He's a sycophant. He's just a sycophant. He's a worshiper of the left, and the left's baby is Dr. Fauci. I've never seen anything like it, and he refuses to come down hard on him, and I've pretty much just written him off like I would any other person who's that single-minded. I like to give the example because I'm so obsessed with John F. Kennedy, and of course I am. He's my favorite president for many reasons, but I try to use the example of my love for John F. Kennedy to show people what I look for when I'm looking into either politicians or leaders to respect. I'm looking at somebody who's okay, if you have the left and their ideology is what JFK is to me, right? So their ideology is what JFK is. It's my hero. It's my everything. I love it. I'll defend it. However, this is the difference between me and that kind of ideology. I can look at my portrait of JFK, which is right next to me. I have a framed portrait of John F. Kennedy, and I love it. It's my favorite picture. And I can look at that picture, and if somebody were to ask me about John F. Kennedy, I could be like, oh my gosh, he's my favorite. But also, he was a drug-addicted philanderer who cheated mercilessly on his beautiful, loving wife, even when she was pregnant. He was a horrible husband. I can admit that. So, and still love John F. Kennedy for other reasons. But I can still admit that bad. And that's something that I've seen with especially like the left of the politicians, that they only want to admit the good and they refuse to admit obvious bad mistakes. But that's not a good perspective to hold. If you have a hero, that's why they say never meet your heroes, because it'll disappoint you. Well, it shouldn't be the case, because you shouldn't idolize your heroes. You shouldn't make them perfect gods. Like JFK is not a god; he's a human being, or he was, you know. And the truth is, he was a horrible husband, but he still was, in my opinion, a great leader. And you know, I see that with the Democrats on this issue, especially on COVID. They don't want to say, okay, we did the best that we could, but our best still did a lot of harm. They don't want to say that, and they don't want to say it about Fauci. And to me, I kind of close that kind of mentality off. If you can't admit the bad, then what am I listening to you for? It's just going to be nothing but a biased response, because you're not being subjective.
Yeah, one thing I find so strange is just this big assumption of like Fauci equals Democrat. I don't know like what I, missed out on, that was just this huge agreement from everyone. Like he served under, every administration for the last however many, 7 administrations or something, Republican or Democrat. He's bipartisan. He's unelected. He's a bureaucrat. This whole thing of like, if you're a Democrat, you love Fauci, and if you're a Republican, you hate him. I just didn't really get that. I didn't understand the
I don't know where that
assumption
came
around
from.
that.
I have no idea either, but I have noticed that. I think it's just the whole...
And he fulfilled the role as well, sort of kind of going along with that himself, Yeah,
well, I think a lot of it came down to just the way the numbers were. Like if you look, and I don't know how to ever prove this, like I'm not a political scientist, this is not my realm of information, but political science is something I do find interesting. I'm just not the smartest person on this issue, but when you look at, if you were to, let's just play like a thought experiment. If you were to deploy some sort of biological agent on the world, right, and you need, for the idea that you would need to funnel a whole bunch of money to create this vaccine, and you wanted the best uptake possible to profit off this vaccine, right, the idea would be you wanted to make the need for that vaccine as excitable as possible in large cities so that you got most of the population under your wing. In the United States, the way we're set up is large cities are largely Democrat cities. That's just the way it is. And so if you were to strategically market something to be approved by the most people possible in this country, you would target Democrat cities because they are the largest. You got New York City, Los Angeles, Seattle, Chicago. These are Democrat cities. But they're also the largest population. And if you wanted most acceptance, you would have to make it a Democratic issue so that you could get the highest uptake. I think if it was something that they weren't urgent on everybody needing, it wouldn't have been so politicized. But because they wanted so many people, that in turn, in order to make it something that those who lived in those large cities, most of your population, you would have to gear it towards their interests somehow.
Yeah.
And this is the numbers way of looking at it, I think, how that might have transpired. But that's just a guess. I don't know.
Yeah, I don't know if I'll ever really figure this one out before I leave this earth. I will never for the life of me understand how people thought it was a protest of Trump or a protest against Trump to take the Trump vaccine or the MAGA jab, as I call it. Like, you're protesting the guy, then you go and take his vaccine. I don't get it.
Yeah, Biden did that as well. And Kamala was like, we're not going to take a vaccine if Trump makes it. And then they take it and immediately
and mandate it
like,
when they said
what?
they wouldn't and couldn't. I'm amazed by that. I mean, and my point is about that specifically is that was a rare case where I actually agreed with Biden and Kamala, who I don't like at all, but I agreed with them when they said they distrust the Trump vaccine. But then they changed their minds and punished me and others for not changing our minds with them. I'm like, how do you punish me for not changing my mind? I agreed with what you said before. You changed your mind. I didn't change my mind. I agree with what you said in the first place. Don't say I can't go to a restaurant. I can't like sit down and eat a salad or something at a restaurant because, I didn't agree with you changing your mind. But anyhow, speaking of the weaponization of viruses or biowarfare. You've looked a lot into the actual gain of function activities that were going on leading up to this dramatic event that changed the world and changed everyone's life in one way or another. And a name that comes up, I've heard frequently in some of your your spaces, some of your discussions, is Ralph Barrick. So I think a lot of people don't know who he is. I'd say the vast majority of Americans have never heard of Ralph Barrick at all. For those who have never heard of him, for those who have heard the name but aren't really sure, could you just give us an intro to Ralph Barrick and where he fits into all this? And maybe if the opportunity arises, you'll sneak in a couple other names that maybe we haven't heard of. But tell us about Barrick.
Oh, yeah. I can definitely do that. So Ralph Barrick, okay, so here we go. I know everything about this man, and it's almost as if I've met him, but I haven't. It's very strange because I know so much about his life. So Ralph Barrick is a virologist and an immunologist. He has a background from University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill, which is where he is currently a professor at and has been for about 20 years now. He runs a laboratory there. It's a BSL Level 3 laboratory that was built at the University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill in 2003. He works at a particular department in the UNC Chapel Hill University system and under the Gilling School of Infectious Diseases and Public Health. That particular function within the school is heavily and has been heavily funded by a very lovely philanthropic couple named Bill and Melinda Gates for the past 20 years. So Bill and Melinda Gates have been funding Ralph Barrick's laboratory since pretty much the beginning of the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation. So early 2000s, right around the time that they got their BSL Level 3, you start seeing $20 million, $16 million, $5 million, whatever it is, coming in multiple times a year from the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation to Ralph Barrick's laboratory, which of course is huge because it's not like they do that to every single, infectious disease lab at every university. They took particular interest in Ralph Barrick's work there. He focuses primarily on, ever since 2003, and the reason why in 2003 he gets the BSL laboratory is because there's an outbreak of SARS in China in 2003. And it kills about 800 people total, or infects 800, and it had a very short-lived pandemic spread. It made it to the U.S. It made it to multiple countries, but it didn't. We were lucky. I would say we're fortunate. In fact, it didn't kill a vast amount of people. And by the time a year had gone by, this strain was already, dead to the environment. Essentially, it had already been challenged by itself, and it phased itself out, which is generally what the cold does and the flu does every year. And so Ralph Barrick, though, was particularly interested in that. It was a study he had been working on coronavirus research in his undergrad and during his medical school years. He was very interested in the common cold, which is a coronavirus. So as he matriculates and gets his own laboratory at UNC, and then there's this huge outbreak, he is called upon by multiple different entities like the CDC and the World Health Organization, tried to get together groups of virologists to essentially look at what was going on. And Ralph Barrick was one of the people that was very interested in these coronaviruses. So he dedicates pretty much the rest of his career to this day towards zoonotic spillover coronaviruses, which is what they claimed SARS was. And for those who don't remember SARS, if you you can look it up online, but if you look, the claim of how coronavirus SARS-1 started is exactly the same thing they'll tell you how it started with SARS-CoV-2, that it went from a bat to a pangolin and through a wet market. They think it infected humans, and that's the story. So the COVID SARS-CoV-2 story is not new, but it's something that was pushed heavily, and it is still pushed very heavily by Ralph Baric, that this is to blame on animals in wet markets, right? And so he gets put on a special committee when the MERS outbreak occurs in 2013. He gets put on that because since the last 10 years, he had been heavily dedicated in working with China because they have a very large bat population, but they have found many SARS-like coronaviruses in the populated bats in China. And he does gain-of-function work. And by gain-of-function work, I'm going to use a general terminology that not Fauci's pristine, fake, remodeled definition. I'll use the real definition. Gain-of-function research involves researching a potential pathogen of concern, and that is either new, emerging, or already found to be somewhat lethal, either in its zoonotic population or in a human population. Either one. If it has any sort of threat, any work on it at that point is considered dual-use research of concern, because it is already a concern. And if you're working on it for, say, you just want to track different mutagens in it and just play with it a little bit to see how you can make it weaker, it's dual-use research. But when you start taking a goal with that particular pathogen, say it can't infect ferrets, but it can infect hamsters, we want to do some changes to make it more able to infect ferrets. That's gain of function, because you're taking a virus that beforehand its functionality could not properly infect a ferret. It could infect, mice and hamsters, but it just couldn't yet. So then you altered it genetically so that you could have it receive, or actually work with the receptors that the ferrets have, which are not the same across all animals. So you'd have to change something, and it gains the function of now being able to infect ferrets, hence the term gain of function. So that's what Ralph Baric was doing with SARS. He was doing gain of function work so that most of the SARS that exist today and other coronaviruses and SARS-like coronaviruses exist in millions of strains around the world, in bats, in camels, and because it's a coronavirus. So almost all mammals are infected at some point, multiple times in their lives, with coronaviruses. And most of them are completely innocuous. You would never notice them, like the common cold. Your child gets it after 5 days in some chicken noodle soup. Your kid is fine. Same thing in the animal world. They don't even exhibit symptoms or asymptomatic spread for most of these. But a lot of them don't jump species very easily, and Ralph Baric is very aware of this. Is part of evolutionary biology that he would have had to take to become a virologist. He understands how these things work. So in order to expedite the process of discovering the very limits of what a virus could do, like can it cause, fatalities in humans? Can it cause, all these other severe adverse effects? We need to know that according to science. They need to know that so that they can be better prepared to make countermeasures for those kind of problems. And the scientific setup of it sounds great. But Ralph Baric was a huge game changer in the world of synthetic biology, which is what we call it when we start making chimeric viruses. When you start altering them and giving them new functions, you create a synthetic virus. It's not that it's not made of something real. It's made of very real materials, made of a backbone of SARS, for instance, and they'll give it a name, usually based on where it was created. But it's synthetic because it does not exist in that form naturally. That's why we call it synthetic biology. It's still bio, it's still real, but its placement in our history is not natural. You're forcing evolutions that have yet to occur. He started in 2006 with a huge change to not just virology, but to all of science. Was massively changed. And this will be something I think Ralph Baric will definitely go in history books for, because he was the first person in the history of mankind that was able to take the most common virus strain in mammals, the coronavirus, and able to alter it without leaving the imprint on it that you have changed it. So before, it would be like the ink dye pack if you're robbing a bank. That every time you robbed a bank, you got ink all over you. And you could find the robber because he's got the ink all over, and you know exactly who robbed the bank. Well, in virology, it's very similar. If you start splicing areas, you will see that splice mark where you have cut into the genome and inserted something else. You will see that difference under a microscope. Even when it's released into the wild, it leaves a signature very much like a genetic marker. And so you would be able to capture that, get a sputum sample of it or a blood sample, look at it under an electron microscope and go, aha, right there, do you see that breakage and reconnecting? That's not normal. And they would be able to tell exactly when that was by looking at the rest of the sequence and seeing how many alterations there were from prior to that break. And that would give you a good idea of exactly when. They could probably pinpoint down to the day or week you made that alteration, because they could see how long it takes to challenge it from previous genetic sequence to the sequence that is attached on afterwards. And they can do that comparison. And they could find, there's other markers too, like the further challenges. Some challenges are very geographical. It was challenged by zebras. There was some sort of zebra coronavirus that got meshed in there because it got challenged. Well, there's not everywhere in the world has zebras. You could really start to file down where. And that was always a real good thing about genetics, is we could find out where something is from, just looking at it under a microscope with the right kind of... Ralph Baric changed that because he was able to make that change, a genetic change in an organism, and you, me, and Einstein himself could never tell the difference between that and anything natural. We would never be able to tell. And that changed forever biology in 2006. So he has this capability of Frankensteining these very possibly dangerous pathogens. And he goes on to teach this method to his understudies at his laboratory, which eventually become to include people like Shizheng Li, who is the quote-unquote bat lady at the Wuhan Institute of Virology. He teaches this to her, and on her own testimony and in Ralph Baric's testimonies, that they've had thousands of these altered viruses that you can't tell are altered. And that's a huge problem. And it's not, here's the thing, when Ralph Baric had discovered this and announced it to National Academy of Sciences, instead of being investigated, he was rewarded and given a $3 million grant to continue his work, and then was published and added to the National Academy of Sciences, because it was such a marvel to the science community, but to us unsuspecting civilians, this is very scary, especially when you find later that he continues this gain-of-function work, that he can now hide forever from anybody and never tell you. You don't have to, we would just be none the wiser. And then his laboratory goes on to have multiple lab leaks, even into 2020. In December of 2020, there was a lab leak of SARS-2 coronavirus from his laboratory that was covered up by the mainstream news and covered up by NIH and Fauci. And they covered this up. But his laboratory, and I don't live that far away. I'm very close. I'm within a day's drive of his laboratory in UNC because I'm in Virginia, and I'm right on the border. And North Carolina is just a hop and skip south of me. And there's 2 million people, residents, that live very close to that campus. And when you read the book by Alison Young called Pandora's Gamble, which is a fantastic book, it's just riddled with this kind of information that I'm discussing now about these lab leaks. She had FOIA requested and gotten back pages, I think it was something like 80 pages worth of lab incidents and lab leaks that occurred here in the States, a lot of them at UNC Chapel Hill, and that went completely unreported. But what does that mean to the population when we have people like Ralph Baric and he's so powerful? Because, yeah, it's just coronaviruses that he can do this with now. And there are some pretty terrifying coronaviruses. MERS had a 30% fatality rate. That's insane. Just imagine out of 10 people 3 of them dying. That's the rate you're looking at for how bad it was. And now that was nothing like that with COVID. COVID was, 0.1% fatality versus a whole 10%. It's massively different. It's 100-fold higher. And so you would be dealing with, imagine him doing gain of function on MERS to make it more virulent so that it spread much easier in the population. Then you have essentially just a silver bullet circling the world, hitting 1 or 3 out of every 10 people. And that's a lot to deal with, especially if you look at like Nipah, which is not a coronavirus. It's a similar clade of virus, but it's not a coronavirus. This would be something, it's its own. It's a Nipah virus. But they're in the same lineage of zoonotic spillover type of viruses, and he's done a lot of work on it. But Nipah carries anywhere between 35 and 75% fatality rate. Some outbreaks that they've had, 75, 80% of them die. That's a huge number. I mean, now you're looking at anywhere between 3 and almost 8 people out of 10 would be dying from that. And if you were to make that more virulent and harder to kill, for instance, just changing a few genes to make certain things more resistant or less resistant, you could essentially have, a really big problem. You're looking at, the Spanish flu times 10 for problems, and that was obviously very devastating for our population. And Ralph Baric is like the keeper of the keys. And his involvement in COVID it would drive any researcher mad because he's the one person they have not called to testify. And he's the one person that you should, because if there's a pandemic going on in a world where there's a guy who just so happens to be the expert on the type of pathogen that is encircling the world and killing people, and that guy just so happens to be the only person on Earth that has perfected the ability to hide whether or not it was made in the lab, you should probably investigate that guy. But they haven't. And he's very well protected. There's something very strange. It's very much like how Fauci is treated. Ralph Baric is very similarly treated, where he's a golden child you just can't touch. And I'm under the personal belief that a lot of it has to do with the family dynamic. It sounds very silly because people think science is very laboratories and all that, which it does include that. But we have to take into account, which at least I do as a researcher, who these people are, not necessarily everything they do, which I do like to know that as well, but I want to know who are they, what motivates this person to do the things that they're doing. And I tend to find in conversations just throughout my life, most people care, it sounds crazy, it sounds selfish, but most people care about themselves. And when I say themselves, I mean not just them, but their families, their friends, their interests, themselves, what they create around them as their world. For you, Jeremiah, you care about doing your podcast, you care about teaching, chess, but to some people, they don't care at all about those things. Sure. And it's not anything mean, it's just like that's their world and that's your world. And there's just certain things people care about, but that's what drives most of our actions, is either to protect or enhance the things that we have in our lives. We want to get a better car. We want to enhance our transportation, or a bigger house. You want to enhance it. Or your kid goes to jail and you want to get them out, so you're going to protect that. And and you can see how the actions play out when you start involving people's personal life into kind of understanding why they do what they do. Yeah. And for Ralph Baric, his family is very involved in this effort. And so him protecting himself in this instance, it makes a lot of sense, because it's not just Ralph Baric. It's his legacy. He's always gone to that school. He was a star athlete at that school when he was an undergrad. He was a premier, almost Olympic level swimmer. He was incredibly blessed at swimming. You wouldn't be able to tell from him now, but he was actually quite the athlete. And he met his wife there. His wife works there. And she has a very interesting position at UNC Chapel Hill. She is the grant manager for the Billings School of Public Health. So all those millions of dollars that were coming in from Bill and Melinda Gates, it was her job to secure those and make sure they got to her husband's research. So she was dealing with all the money. But it doesn't end with just the wife. He has a son. His son is now the swim coach. His old favorite thing to do there was swim, and now his son's a swim coach. His other son, his youngest son, Thomas Baric is now a coronavirologist who works in his father's laboratory. who also does a lot of this gain of function work, working with viruses in other countries. And then he also has two daughters. One of the daughters is heavily invested in this entire kind of scam that they've got going as a family. And he is a family man, and when you understand he very much loves his family. If he loves anything more than science, it's his family. It's very apparent by how close they are, how much they're, invested in each other. It's a beautiful thing. From an outside perspective, I think it's a gorgeous thing to have a loving, connected family like this. But his daughter works under Francis Collins for the Human Genome Project, because Francis Collins is also a native of North Carolina. And so he's the keeper of the keys on synthetic biology, gain of function, and his work was directly related and funding the Wuhan Institute of Virology's gain of function research. He's the one who taught them how to do that and conducted research that once 2014 came around, there was a moratorium. He was forced, not forced, I don't want to say forced to make him blameless here. He chose to take the work and offshoot it through another company called EcoHealth Alliance to work in Wuhan with one of his understudies, whose name is Xijing Li. And from there, of course, we have now the pandemic that it's been 4 years going, and they've never found the host animal, and they've never found the intermediary animal, and they still want you to believe that it came from a bat and a pangolin at a wet market. But it's hard to ignore the possibility, the very strong possibility that this was lab created. And if it was, it comes down to one man at the end of the day, and that man is Ralph Baric.
Wow. That was a great overview of the man. And I mean, so much to consider. Where do you stand? Oh, first of all, before I ask this question, if anyone wants to sneak in a call, I'm not sure if we'll have time, but the number here, of course, is 888-874-4888. 888-874-4888 if you have a question for our guest, Destiny Rezendez. And also, let me quickly announce, I just put out a new Substack. So please check out my Substack. I know this program is reaching a lot of people, but I ask you, please help me build up this fire. Help me reach more ears. We really want to be able to make a difference. The medical freedom movement is such a critical movement, and we just need all hands on deck right now. And this show is a resource to that movement, but I really ask for your help in making people aware of this program and my Substack, which is sort of a theme of my Substack. Go check it out. And also, Destiny Rezendez also has a Substack. I know it's sort of a fledgling Substack. I know you haven't put out a lot of stuff there, but I'm sure there's going to be some great stuff there to come, and there's some great stuff to begin with. And definitely keep track of Destiny. Look her up on Twitter. Go check out her Substack, and I would love to know, where do you stand right at this moment, Destiny, in terms of your research? What is the thrust of what you are looking into now? And can we look forward to a book at some point pertaining to all of this?
I think a book's definitely going to happen.
Seems like
I think a book is going to happen, yeah.
It seems like you kind of already have a book and you just need to organize it in terms of the format.
That's exactly what it is. I recently just did space, I don't know, maybe less than a month ago, and the PDF that I had compiled for the information for it was like 500 pages. So I already have a book. I just need to, like you said, organize it. But right now, I'm really I am enmeshed in the understanding of the biological weapons program in the country. It's not really just the United States, because the United States, our bioweapons program kind of overlaps with other countries, including Russia and Japan, the UK in general. There's quite a few places where our programs were enmeshed in other programs. We have NAMRU, which is part of the Army's medical research unit, and that's in Egypt, for instance, and there's actually multiple NAMRU headquarters. There's one in Germany and in Peru. They're all over the world. So when I say the U.S. bioweapons industry, it's not just the United States. We've always been very globalistic in anything involving disease research and bioweapons, because they don't stay locale. They don't stay in one little place. So you tend to have a very broad program when it comes to foreign influence. And the history that I'm working on right now, I just did a space on this yesterday to finally close the nail on the coffin for whether or not this is a bioweapon. And that's the whole point of what I'm looking at. I was like, is this a bioweapon? Because we hear it thrown around quite a bit. COVID is a bioweapon, the vaccine's a bioweapon. Well, as a researcher, it's great if you want to call it that, but let's get down to the roots and see if that's really what this is. Is there any evidence to support that other than your opinion? Because opinions are great. I have many of them, but I can't present my opinions with any sort of, seriousness. No one's going to take me seriously if all I ever do is just espouse my own opinion. So I try to do the research into the bioweapons program and see, did it overlap with COVID? Did the bioweapons program that was in this country create this countermeasure, the quote-unquote vaccine? And what I found, and continuing to dig into, is that indeed the biological weapons program in the United States did, in fact, cross over with coronavirus and did create, not just in part, but largely create Operation Warp Speed. And the evidence for that took a long time to find, but I finally have found it.
Wow, that's phenomenal. Yeah, I mean, one thing that I'd like to say in terms of warfare and the never-ending fight of man against man, everything is up for grabs and nothing is off limits. It's like, hey, we want to figure out every way of blowing you up. If we could blow you up, we want to blow you up 10 times over now. If we can shoot you with the gun, now we want to shoot you with a laser. Every type of weapon, a better blade, a better gun, a better laser, a better bioweapon. Bio-warfare is part of warfare. And there's unfortunately no restraint ultimately in warfare. And on the subject of gain of function, it always occurred to me, whoever's messing around with this gain of function stuff has clearly never heard of Murphy's Law. I mean, come on. We actually have
what
a
goes
call.
Around comes around.
Yes, seriously. Like, you guys never heard of Murphy's Law, but we have a caller on the line. We have Lee from Manhattan. How are you today, Lee?
Oh, I'm okay. Thank you. Thank you for all you do and all your informative programming.
Thank you so much for listening, and thanks for calling.
Yeah, thank you to the guests for sharing that information. I had a question about, my understanding was that certain scientists from the very beginning had identified declaring some kind of cleavage site or something distinctive about that so-called virus that made it seem to have been created, like Luc Montagnier.
Right.
Immediately recognized it. So I had a question about how does that fit in? Thank you.
Yeah, it's a great question. Yeah, I immediately thought of Luc Montagnier as you were describing what you were describing.
I love Luc Montagnier. Yeah, I can answer that.
Yeah, great.
What you're speaking of is a furin cleavage site. The furin cleavage site is a really important segment of code that determines whether or not a receptor is going to be able to bind to the receptor binding domain of another species, another cell. And without that binding spot, we're unable to have it infect our cells. It would just essentially hit the outside of the cell, and the receptors would not be able to have that communication and allow that viron to enter into our cell. And according to all the science before, coronavirus has never exhibited this furin cleavage site, which allowed it to bind to human cells. It never exhibited that in the SARS or MERS. And so it's not seen in natural coronaviruses. When Luc Montagnier took a look at this in his laboratory, may he rest in peace because he did pass away a year ago, he had seen this, and he was very definitive in his beliefs. I watched him on Channel 7 News in France. He was very adamant that because of this furin cleavage site, among other things that were noticeably different in this virus, that it was in fact created in a laboratory. And for those who don't know, Luc Montagnier was the virologist that is credited and given a Nobel Prize for the discovery that HIV is a leading causative agent of AIDS. And so this is a Nobel Prize winner. And if there is any sort of person to listen to, I mean, Fauci doesn't have a Nobel. Not even close. But, Luc Montagnier was very certain about this, very adamant, until he died, that was a smoking gun, if you will.
Yeah, I mean, the Nobel Prize unfortunately lost credibility way back when they gave Henry Kissinger the Nobel Peace Prize, who's like one of the greatest
Oh, goodness,
mass
yeah.
murderers of history. And then, it was further discredited when they gave a Peace Prize to Obama, the I have a drone president. And then, and the absurdity of giving the two, I forget their names offhand, for inventing the COVID vaccine. I don't know why those two got selected as the people who get the credit, but they're wearing masks. So it's like the vaccine's not that great because you're still sitting there at the ceremony wearing a mask, which is kind of ridiculous. And notice how they said a black woman invented the COVID vaccines to try to sell it to black people.
Kizzmekia Corbett.
Okay, right. Well, how come she didn't get a Nobel Prize? What's up with that? Where was her Nobel
Prize? She did get a prize, though. She did get a prize. She got a very prestigious prize called the Golden Goose Prize. She got it along with the rest of the virologists at the Vaccine Research Center. And interestingly enough, the scientist who brought us remdesivir, he was also given that same award, the Golden Goose Award.
Wow.
And that comes with a lot of money and prestige in the science community. Not quite a Nobel Prize, but it's pretty good. It's really up there in terms of prizes for the science community. She did get one, but not a Nobel. And I don't know, maybe it's just me, Jeremiah, maybe you could speak to this as being a person of color myself here. I was highly offended when Fauci tried to wave Kizzmekia Corbett in front of the news to be like, oh, blacks should not be worried about this, even though we have a history of disenfranchising the black population in this country with medical experimentation.
Oh, yeah.
Despite that, don't worry, because we have this token black scientist.
Oh, it was so blatant. It was so blatant how they were pandering.
It was horrible.
That was great when
people like my father fell for that, though. Like, my father was like, "Oh, it was invented by a black woman." I was like, "Yeah."
I don't care who invented it. Honestly, I don't care. I don't want to take it. Like, I don't care I don't care if it's soul sister number one. I'm not taking that stuff. But yeah, it's amazing how they pander and they treat us like children. Basically, they infantilize us with propaganda at that level. We are literally out of time.
Insulting.
Yeah, it's insulting. It's insulting. And, and we could just say, well, you didn't really care about our community up until now. You don't really care about our community on an everyday basis. So why are you suddenly all concerned about this?
I want people to understand closely. Like right now, I want you to know, like, I've read every piece of article that has ever graced Kizzmekia Corbett's authorship. And let me tell you, her role in creating this vaccine is beyond minimal, especially if you got the Pfizer vaccine. She had zero hand in the Pfizer formulation for the vaccine, zero, which was well over 60-something% of the uptake. So for him to say that the vaccine was created by a black woman, maybe partial credit for less than 40% of the population's uptake.
Yeah.
But by and large, no. She had nothing to do with Pfizer, which was the predominant. Yeah.
Right. I mean, black folks invented so many things in America despite the conditions under which, they were being oppressed and so on. And it's remarkable, but that's something I don't want credit for. I don't want the black community to take credit for this monstrosity.
I wouldn't either.
Yeah.
I wouldn't either. Kizzmekia is nothing. If anything, they've used the poor girl, and it's just another moment of African American being exploited in history. That's really what it was.
Yeah, exactly.
Exploited her to try to get the uptake in population, and it's really a crime to her as much as it is the rest of the population.
Yeah, I agree. Well, thank you so much, Destiny Rezendez. You were phenomenal. Cannot wait for your book to be out. And it was just an incredible experience to have you on the air today. I hope we get to do it again sometime soon. Please check out my Substack. Please follow Destiny on Twitter. And everyone have a beautiful weekend. If you're in the Yonkers area, I'm playing for free. I think it says 71 Water and Grant Street or something. I'm not familiar with Yonkers. 71 Water Grant. That's a weird name to me, Water Grant Street. But okay, yeah, 71 Water Grant Street in Yonkers is a free show today. Everyone have a beautiful weekend. Thank you so much, Destiny. Peace and love to everyone.
Thank you.
With open arms towards the sun, you feel the warmth of the rays. And